Hey there. What you're about to hear is part 2 on our series on the poem If by Rudyard Kipling. If you haven't listened to part 1, I would suggest you go back and listen to that. If not, if you've already listened to it or you just don't care, feel free to jump on in. Anyway, this is part 2 of If by Rudyard Kipling. Howdy, and welcome to the Preaching Poetry Podcast. The Preaching Poetry Podcast uses poetry to inspire conversation and to rediscover the world. Let's get to it. He says, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools. Man, in the era of calling things fake news, how do you, my son, respond to having your words twisted to bait your opponents? This happens famously with politicians, leaders, celebrities on Twitter. We're constantly giving snippets and blurbs and quotes, and we're trying to sort of outrage people. In this world, can you bite your tongue when somebody misrepresents you? Do you get mad? Do you have to immediately respond? Do you have to start going on the offensive and insulting people? Can you bear to hear the truth of what you're speaking and saying twisted into fake news? Some people can't handle it. But Kipling says it's a virtue to be able to endure the slander, right? To endure when people lie about you. To endure when people say things that they shouldn't say. Don't fall into the trap. And then the last part of that stanza, he says, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn out tools. Kipling would say, son, are you undaunted by the destruction of your life's work? I get mad when the podcast episode I'm recording glitches out and I have to do it again. But Kipling says, if you can stoop and build up your life's work again with worn out tools, do you always rise again every time you get knocked down? Every time something goes wrong, do you merely get back up and keep going? That's hard. Okay. See, as a teacher, I have taught Texas history, okay? And I've taught some really extreme events that have happened in history. I've taught about the Galveston hurricane that wiped the city off of the island and off of the map, totally destroyed the city. I've taught about the Dust Bowl, okay? But there were people who endured and lived through a lot more than just a temporary setback in one day, and they merely, in the face of disaster, destruction, acts of God, they picked right back up and rebuilt. That's an inspiring thing. Instead of laying down, giving up, quitting, and giving in, to just stoop back down and get right back to work. Can you do that? The third stanza, he says, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on a turn of pitch and toss. This is a part of the poem that our Redditor from earlier quoted, saying that Kipling advocates for reckless risk-taking and bottling up your emotions, two things that real men do. Not only is this self-destructive, depressing behavior, it also sets a dangerous expectation that all men must conform to it, or else. But is that how we should read this poem? Maybe. Maybe not. I think it's important here to look at the words that Kipling actually says rather than the ideas that we just sort of, the impressions that we get when we read him. So he says, if you can make a heap of all your winnings, and I think winnings is important. Okay, so we've already been told that triumph and disaster are imposters, and we ought to learn to reject both of them and treat them both as if they are not our true selves. So we are not bound or enslaved to triumph or disaster. So when he says, make a heap of all your winnings, I think it's important to realize this goes right back to that idea of triumph and disaster. So your winnings would be the triumph. You're gambling. You've bet some money. You've played a few good hands of poker. You've made some money. That is triumph. Are you a slave to triumph? If we gained money by betting and gambling and risk-taking, we've already taken the risk. By doing anything, we always risk triumph or disaster. So I think the point here is, do you hedge your bets? Are you defined by your losses? And sure, we might say that this advocates reckless risk-taking, but I don't think so. I'm not convinced that the word winnings necessarily implies that somebody out here is betting their paycheck. Okay, some people gamble responsibly. They take money to play with for fun. They go, they gamble it, and when it's gone, they leave. So the question here is, what masters you? Are you a slave? Like, do you have to keep gambling? Are you chasing a high? I don't think that's what he's talking about here. I think instead, what he's talking about is, are you a slave to what you've accomplished? Are you unwilling to risk what you've already obtained, even if you think you've got a good hand? See, I don't think you have to read recklessness into this. And I don't think that you have to say that never breathing a word about your loss means repressing it. I think he's talking about complaining. You know, if your identity is dominated by your triumph and your disaster, then winning all that money will be all that you talk about. But if you gamble it and lose it, that's going to be all you talk about too. And I think Kipling would say, don't be defined by your wins and losses. Treat triumph and disaster the same. If you were willing to get in this game and take the bet, if you've got a good bet, keep going. You may win, you may lose, but don't be the kind of person who wins a little bit of money and then hedges their bets and quits. He says, no, keep going. Do the best that you can, and don't be the kind of person who associates their worth and their identity with what they're able to win or with what they lose. Don't be mastered by either one of those things. So I think there's kind of a pro-con here. I think we could read this the way that our Redditor mentioned it. I think we could say, yeah, there's definitely the hint in here of gambling and of sort of going all in and losing everything, and then, you know, never breathing a word about your loss. You know, if you just can never talk about it, yeah, I can see the point. I get that. And I'm not trying to say that that idea right there, that reckless gambling, yeah, that's toxic. Okay? Refusing to talk about what's bothering you and hurting you, what's causing you sort of mental anguish and anxiety. Yeah, if you don't talk about those things, that's bad. That's definitely toxic. But I don't think that's required in the reading of this poem, at least not from this particular spot. I think we have to go back to the words triumph and disaster. Do you treat winning and losing as though neither one of them have ultimate power over you? So he says, and lose, right? So make a heap of all your winnings and lose. And start again at your beginnings, never breathing a word about your loss. Okay, so you lost your bet. Do you whine and complain? Do you do double or nothing? Toss your car keys on the table? Do you start betting with what you can't afford to lose? No. Start again at your beginnings. Don't start again in the hole. Okay, I think it's important to understand that we have to look at the words, and we're going to have to decide, are we going to give Kipling the benefit of the doubt, or are we not? And I think if we give him the benefit of the doubt, we can look at the word winnings and say these are things that you've earned gambling. So you've already taken a risk. You've already made a bet. But this is not you betting your rent money. Because if you did, you wouldn't be able to start again at the beginnings. If you lose it, you'd be in the hole. So I don't think that it's important. I think it's really important to read this from both sides. So, dear Redditor, I think that we have to be careful about how we flesh out the nuance and the meaning of the poetry. And I think that in this instance, generosity is required. I think it's important to call out where people are wrong, and I think it's really good that we're having this conversation because, you bring up a good point. But I'm also going to give Kipling the benefit of the doubt because he's dead. He's not going to be here to speak for himself. So I think that we need to have these conversations nuanced and fleshed out, and we need to discuss both ways of looking at things. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to really understand this poem the way that I think that we should. So let's be as generous as we can, but also let's be cautious. And let's make sure that we're not overstating our case either. Okay? Going on in the third stanza, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. Kipling says, son, you need to have endurance under pressure. And that is a largely obsolete idea these days. In my modern day American life, the need for forcing heart and nerve and sinew to serve their turn is rare in modern life. So what do? We seek it out in recreation. You get extreme sports. So this sort of brings to mind mountain climbers, sailors, or even, not necessarily recreational, but soldiers. Okay, people who are putting their lives on the line, people who are in dangerous places, risking things. Okay, and so he says, do you have that willpower? Do you have the ability to resist the short-term temptation in order to meet a long-term goal? Okay, that's how the American Psychology Association defines willpower. The ability to resist short-term temptation in order to meet a long-term goal. And so Kipling's version of willpower here is a stoic picture of iron will. But here's where I'm going to disagree with Kipling a little bit. You see, willpower is an acquired trait. If you want to achieve an iron will, you have to exercise your self-control. So I don't know that going and just trying to mentally force yourself to do something, that's probably not going to work. You only have a finite amount of willpower. You have to grow in your willpower. And Kipling doesn't really tell us that you have to grow in this. He just says, force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve their turn long after they are gone. The reality is that's not going to work. And while it may conjure a romantic picture of someone hanging by their fingertips from a cliff, yeah, in that situation, sure. But most of the time, if you want to grow in willpower, you have to kind of hack your brain's reward system. So you have to practice, set reasonable goals, and then you have to give yourself rewards. And that will actually help you endure the stress of exercising willpower, and will help you to have more willpower down the road. And so then perhaps when you are in that extreme situation, having to force your heart and nerve and sinew to superhuman things, well, maybe then you'll be better prepared to do so. Though I will admit, maybe say you're trying to quit smoking, right? That may at times, you may very well feel like you're holding on when there is nothing in you. Okay? So I'll just say this, if you are battling with your willpower and with your self-control because you're trying to fight an addiction, don't give up. Strive anyway, but strive in your own context. But I will say that relapse and failure is a part of recovery from addiction. So again, Triumph and disaster are both imposters. Just because you pick up a cigarette and you light it up and you have another one, it doesn't mean that you're a complete failure. Relapse is a part of things. And just because you've gone, 5 years and you haven't had a single smoke that long, well, okay, again, triumph is an imposter. Because relapse is always possible as an addict. So my exhortation here is to exercise that willpower and grow that willpower so that you're better able to treat triumph and disaster the same, and that you're better able to overcome, just like Kipling says, that you can hold on even when the only thing that's helping you do that is your will. So grow your will. Strengthen your will. Whew. Okay, it's been a little bit of a long journey. We're going to take a deep breath. Fourth stanza, we're almost done. Okay? If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch. If neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And, which is more, you'll be a man, my son. So, he says, if you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch. This is an important place to just pause and go back to what we know about Kipling himself. Kipling was born into the upper class of colonial British society. Not nobility, mind you, but definitely close to them. And so in higher society, the rabble is often disdained as lacking virtue. And because they lack virtue, that's why they're poor. If they were virtuous, they would have become rich. And, we can read this part arrogantly, or we can read it to remind us that there is truth to crowds being corrupting influences. Okay? So we can make this a stereotype. We can make this a sort of, call it proletariat critique of this virtue and these kings. But I think it's important to recognize that crowds can have corrupting influences. And many of us will succumb to peer pressure. If a crowd of people is doing one thing, we're more likely to go along and do it. And so we can be arrogant about this, or we can read this to remind us that if a crowd is tempting us away from our virtues and our convictions, then we ought to stand strong against peer pressure. Now, walking with kings, I don't know that Kipling ever really did that. I don't know that he was that influential and famous, but he definitely did mix and mingle with nobility. And so I guess what he wants his son to understand here is that a genuine person remembers where they came from. Okay? A genuine person honors their heritage and their roots. So, in the same way that we want to avoid the peer pressure of the crowds, we should avoid the arrogance of that rarefied air when you walk with a king, and not lose the common touch. At least that's how I read it. When he talks about friends or loving foes can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much. This is a place where I'm going to say, all right, this is starting to sound a little bit toxic to me. When he says neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, that level of invincibility is just impossible. Now, some will say that Kipling is presenting these as juxtapositions, right? So, he's trying to help the reader, the son, become well-rounded, to help them navigate the extremes of foes and loving friends. And I can understand that. I can get that. But a plain reading of it sounds really lonely. Again, kind of like being that solo master of your fate and that by yourself captain of your soul. It just sounds really lonely. You see, it would be one thing to learn how to deal with being hurt by your close and loving friends and by your enemies. But if your friends aren't actually close enough to hurt you, then are they really your friends? I mean, do you really have friends if you're not at least a little bit vulnerable with them? And then if all men are with you, but none are so just too closely associated with you, well, you're by yourself. There might be a lot of people around you, but how many of them are with you? Essentially, what I would say is this: if nobody can hurt you, well, there's only one thing that I can think of. There's only one situation you could be in where nobody can hurt you. And that would be if you're dead. If you're dead, yeah, foes can't hurt you. Loving friends can't hurt you. If men count with you, awesome. But it doesn't matter if none count with you too much, otherwise they might be dead too. Like, what? It's the only way that you can avoid any kind of pain from relationships is to either not have any or to be dead. And neither one of those is a good option in my mind. So yeah, I think this one line borders a little bit on toxicity, but I will also take my earlier advice and say that a generous reading is best, and that Kipling is trying to juxtapose extremes, triumph and disaster, winnings and loss. So sure, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, and I'm not going to call Kipling to the carpet on this one. But what I will say is I will call you, listener, friend, okay, if you are so isolated that your enemies can't hurt you, but neither can your friends. If nobody is with you in any real, close, or meaningful way, that's a lonely and dangerous place to be. Don't isolate. Don't push people out of your life until there's no one left. It may hurt to have people around, and as you have to learn to deal with them, as you have to learn to deal with the pain that they may cause. But being alone, that hurts too. Anyway, you'll have to figure that one out for yourself. But the last little bit, right? He says, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, he says, son, I need you to understand the harsh reality that time is unforgiving. The tasks that we need to do are urgent. They will not forgive us if we fail to do them. And sometimes we have to do really hard things and give it our full and best effort. You see, I've been working on my health. I've talked about this some, probably ad nauseum. And so one thing that I have been trying lately to help myself is something called high-intensity interval training. So you sprint and then you jog, because it's not like I can run for a long, long period of time, but, I can sprint for a minute, jog for a minute, walk for a minute, and then kind of repeat. I can do that for a little ways, okay? And I think that the effort there is what will give me success, right? So just continuing to do it even when it's hard, even when it's unforgiving. You keep doing it, but it's not, we're not always going to be able to run for 60 seconds. But I think the point here is still true. If we do our best and give it our full and hardest effort, he doesn't say give it, give your entire life, your time. He says this minute, break it down into a small, accomplishable time frame and go as hard as you can. Take a break, go as hard as you can. And if you do that, eventually your capacity to run may become not just 60 seconds, but maybe 60 minutes. It's a thought. So yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Now there's two ways to look at this last part that are pretty easy to just sort of pull out kind of on the surface. And one is the colonial aspect. Remember, Kipling was a colonialist, looking at the world, saying, this is the British Empire, man. This is our jam. We got to come in here and civilize the world and bring civilization to the world and blah, blah, blah. And the earth is ours. And perhaps that's the way that Kipling meant it. And perhaps that's the way that you would mean it. Maybe you think that if you can become this certain kind of person, you can, take a hold of at least some of the earth, your chunk of it, and be the master of that domain. And maybe that's true. Another interpretation is biblical. Right? Maybe this is a reference to the Bible. And so in Genesis, in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, it says that God blessed them, meaning Adam and Eve, the people that he made, and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. So maybe that's what he's talking about. Maybe he's talking about regaining that sort of Garden of Eden idea that if you can do these things, maybe you can, overturn the damage done by original sin. Maybe then you will be able to truly fill the earth and subdue it. And maybe if you are that man, that capitalized man, you could be that new or redone Adam. And maybe you'll do it right this time. And maybe that's true. I don't really know which of these is the best way to look at Kipling's version, but I know that you're going to have to kind of figure some of that out for yourself. I don't know which way you'll come down, but the idea here is true that if you can do these things he's talking about in this poem, you are going to be able to at least have some success. But even more than obtaining success or obtaining the earth, Kipling says it is far more and better than all of the earth that you could conquer. It's better than that to be a man. Now, that's a powerful thought, but is it a good one? Does it make you uneasy? Does it inspire you? Is it toxic? I don't know. I think that when he says you'll be a man, he's saying that being a man, that doing these things and being a good man, being a certain kind of man, is more important than claiming the earth, than achieving success. And I think that I can get on board with that. But I think that if we get stuck on that yours is the earth and everything that's in it, well, then we can become very toxic very fast. And I think that if our goal here is to conquer and obtain everything, I think we'll fall short. I think if we follow the advice in this poem because we have some other end in mind, that we're going to fail. But I think if we attempt and we grow in everything in this poem because it shows us the kind of person that we want to be, well, then I don't think that's toxic at all. I don't know, though. What do you think? So let's kind of leave off as we wrap this up with just a couple of thoughts. Okay? How we read authors from the past and authors whose worldview is different from ours, well, knowing how to do that is hard. It's not always easy to do, and it's not always easy to try and put someone in the category of hero or villain. But however, as you know, the U.S. national poet laureate, Billy Collins, said in one of his poems, poetry is a place where meaning only one thing at a time spells malfunction. Poetry is an art, and it's worth critiquing and discussing and attacking and defending. the nuance and the debate of a discussion like this, that's what makes this so much fun. That's why this is even a podcast. So I just want to say I've really enjoyed getting to talk with you guys about this. I really hope that y'all will forgive me. I know this is a little bit longer episode. And I just want to go ahead and say it again, that if you have any thoughts, agreements, disagreements, critiques, whatever it is, please feel free to share them with us. Find us on social media. Comment on our posts. Comment on this episode, this particular podcast. And who knows? Maybe we'll agree, maybe we'll disagree, but part of the fun here is that we get to play with this poem. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening to the Preaching Poetry Podcast. I hope that you enjoyed your time with us, and we look forward to having you back for more. If you like what you heard, please be sure to leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe. If you're looking for more content, you can find us on Apple, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, basically anywhere you find podcasts. If you want to join our community, or just want to get in touch with us, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Preaching Poetry.